I was declared dead by my own son, for the life insurance. The problem is, the hospital tagged me as resurrected. And the piece of plastic that said so would become the blade I used to cut his scheme open, on camera, while he smiled for the check he thought he'd earned. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. You do not expect the word resurrected to show up on hospital plastic. It sounds biblical, like a word that belongs in stained glass and incense, not in a fluorescent corridor that smells like lemon disinfectant and overcooked cauliflower. Yet there it was, etched into a white wristband with my name, my medical record number, and a single black word that had been stamped through a printer at St. Bridget's Hospital at 3:09 a.m. Resurrected. My name is Franklin Hale. Most people call me Frank. I am 73 years old, a widower for 6 winters, a grandfather to a boy who still thinks my old pocketknife can whittle monsters into submission. I buried my Evelyn on a Thursday, when the sky looked like a bruise that would never heal. Since then I have tried to be the sort of grandfather who shows up quietly and fixes what he can, the sticking door, the flat bicycle tire, the long division that looks like a massacre until someone draws boxes around the numbers. I am not perfect, but I am stubborn. I believe in receipts, in handshakes, and in the idea that you never, ever use your father's name to get a check he has not earned by dying. My son did not share that belief. What I remember from the night this began is the tomato vines. Early July, air thick as a wet towel, and the fruit weighed down the strings like a row of red ornaments. I was annoyed because the birds had beat me to the ripest ones. I stepped off the garden pavers to grab a sagging branch and the world blackened, as if someone pulled a hood over my head from behind. No pain at first, just absence. A whole year's deep. They told me later I was dead for 2 minutes and 31 seconds. The words came from a resident wearing a white coat with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, his face soft with relief and apology. My heart had forgotten its job. They shocked it. It hesitated. They shocked it again, and it grudgingly agreed to keep working. A nurse handed me the wristband after they stabilized me, because policy here was to keep any misprints or unusual status bands with the patient's valuables rather than throw them away. The band was meant for morgue direction. Initially I had been marked for post-mortem, then some young tech realized the orders were reversed, and they printed the correction with a single word that made half the floor clap and the other half cross themselves. The tech felt bad. I told him not to. The band was a souvenir of stubbornness. It made me laugh, and laughter hurts less than fear when your chest carries fresh electrical burns. I would come to realize it was proof too. Proof with a timestamp no one could argue with. 2 days into my hospitalization I tried to call my son, Brian, because fathers still reach for their boys when they have been to the edge and gawked at the drop. His phone went to voicemail twice, though he posted a blurry picture of a steak on his social account at the exact minute my third call rang out. I left a message telling him I was all right. When he finally called back, his voice carried a brightness that sounded forced, metallic. Dad. Wow, hey. I heard you had a scare. Scare is a word, I said, watching a nurse hang a fresh bag of saline. I am fine. When can you visit? This week is brutal. He coughed. Mallory's parents are in town. The boys have camp and, obligations. Maybe Sunday. Sunday came and went. He texted a thumbs up emoji and nothing else. I let it go. A man learns not to tug on certain threads if he wants to preserve what fabric is left. When I was discharged, the hospital sent me home with a folder of papers, a schedule of follow-ups, and a restriction list that made me feel like the world's most fragile glass sculpture. At home my neighbor, a former nurse named Gail, made me lentil soup and told me to call her if so much as a eyelashes fell into my eye. I slept for 12 hours in my old recliner because the bed felt like a cliff. Morning brought mail, catalogs, a political flyer, and one stiff envelope addressed to the estate of Franklin Hale. I stood staring until the letters lost their shapes and the white turned to snow. Inside was a condolence note from a bank I had never used with an offer to assist my executor. Executor. That word is supposed to apply to a time when every photograph of me is mounted in a silver frame at the front of a room smelling of lilies, not to a week when my tomato vines need pruning. I called the number on the envelope. A polite woman with a headset asked to speak with my executor. I told her he could talk if she was willing to hold while I went to get him from the mirror. She stammered. I let her off the hook. It was not her fault that someone had sharpened a lie and used it to nick the world in all the places that matter. I drove to my daughter Claire's house because Claire listens like a good radiator, quiet, steady, giving off comfort in a radius. She opened the door, hugged me with careful arms, and told me I looked like an unwatered plant. "You got a condolences to your estate letter?" she asked after I showed her the envelope. "From folks who think I am in a box." She frowned in a way that looked exactly like her mother. "Did you call Brian?" "I did." I sat at her kitchen table and watched her take out a legal pad. Claire is an accountant and has the kind of mind that can find the missing $10 in a sea of numbers without raising her voice. I left him 3 messages. He is busy. I swallowed. Do you think he could have? No, she said too fast, as if speed could make it true. No, Dad. That would be insane. People do insane things when they are wet with debt. I did not know then that Brian's business, a boutique fitness center called Firehouse Fit, was bleeding. I did not know the landlord had posted a notice in the window, that the bank had denied a second extension, that he and Mallory had put a deposit on a new kitchen they could not pay for because marble is forever. I did not know he had called our old insurance agent and asked a series of questions that would make a trained investigator sit up straighter. I learned those things over the next week, one by one, like someone slowly opening X-ray sheets to show you where the fractures line up at odd angles. On Tuesday the second letter came. This one was from Galameda Mutual Life, which had insured me for 30 years because Evelyn liked the way their agent remembered our birthdays. It referred to a claim in the amount of $500,000 payable upon my death to my named beneficiary, my son, Brian Hale. It was a bland letter, polite to a fault, and it made bile rise in my throat. Claire read it twice. "I am calling them," she said, and there was steel in her voice that would have made her mother proud. She put the call on speaker. The woman who answered had a warm, even cadence that suggested a life of soothing people. Her name was Amita, and she worked in what she called the Special Investigations Unit. As soon as we explained that the subject of the claim was sitting at his daughter's kitchen table eating a saltine so he would not bite through his tongue, the warmth in her voice shifted to the kind of professional alert you hear when a pilot is talking through turbulence. "I am sorry you have received this," she said. "Mr. Hale, can I confirm your date of birth and the last 4 digits of your social security number?" I did. Claire watched me like a hawk watches a mouse near a field edge. "Thank you." Amita's keyboard made soft waterfall noises. We flagged the claim internally due to several anomalies. There was a lack of a published obituary, an acceleration of cremation that did not match typical timelines, and the death certificate included a physician's signature that our system marked as inconsistent with prior documents. To be straight with you, we were already concerned. Your call confirms those concerns. I am going to ask you for 2 things. First, do not call your son. Not call him. I asked, because I am old-fashioned enough to default to confrontation when hurt. Not yet. If he filed a false claim using fabricated paperwork, we need to document his intent. Angering him could make him careful. Careful people are harder to catch. Second, would you be willing to partner with us? What does partnering look like? Claire asked, because she knows the cost of things is never just money. We set up a controlled claim closing, Amita said. We let your son believe we are ready to release the check. We film the interaction lawfully. We invite him to bring documents to finalize what he has already submitted. He will likely repeat false statements when prompted. We capture those statements alongside evidence that you are alive. That evidence needs to be incontrovertible. I looked at the hospital folder on Claire's counter. Tucked into the pocket was the plastic band I had tossed there absent-mindedly when I got home. The black letters that had made nurses laugh. The timestamp that put me on a pulse monitor at the same time my son was apparently collecting signatures for my death. Would a hospital bracelet that says resurrected count? I asked. On the other end of the line, something in Amita's voice softened, like a curtain lifting to let in a shaft of sun. Mr. Hale, she said, that would be a blade. I met Amita 2 days later in a storefront office that looked like a tax preparation place trying very hard to be a dental practice. Glass, chrome, eucalyptus. She wore a gray suit and had eyes that missed nothing. With her were 2 other people, a lawyer named Barrett and a man who used to be a detective and now wore loafers with the same posture as if they were uniform. The claim packet your son submitted includes a death certificate signed by a physician named Dr. Polk, Barrett said, sliding a copy across to me. We have called Dr. Polk's office. He did not sign this. He was out of the state that day at a conference in Milwaukee. The notary who stamped it is real, but she notarized a photocopy, not an original, which is against protocol. The funeral director who filed the mortuary report works for an establishment that closed in 2017. What does that mean? Claire asked. It means your son built a bridge out of paper cutouts and tried to drive a truck across it, the ex-detective said mildly. We are going to let him. Then we are going to film the truck falling through. What happens after that? I asked. After the filming? If the facts are as we expect, your son will be arrested for insurance fraud, forgery, and identity theft, Amita said. The company will pursue a clawback of any funds released. We will submit materials to the prosecutor's office. You can file a civil claim for damages as well. I cannot promise outcomes, but I can promise we will not accept his story. We will hold the line. Hold the line. That is what we used to say on the telephone poles when a storm came through and the wires tried to dance themselves into knots. I worked as a lineman for 35 years. I know the sound a cable makes when it snaps. I know how to brace. I nodded. We set a date for the closing, a Tuesday at 2 o'clock in a conference room at a bank branch that often hosted insurance signings for Alameda Mutual Life. The company would treat it like a formal claim release. There would be flowers, the cheap kind you get from a grocery store because everything about the interaction needs to signal routine. The release packet would require Brian to initial on lines that would later read like confessions. I affirm the insured is deceased. I affirm I have provided no fabricated documents. I affirm I have disclosed all relevant facts. I affirm that all signatures are real. The camera would be positioned as if it existed to record the bank's paperwork for quality assurance. The night before the meeting I oiled the hinge on my front door because it had been squealing, and the sound made me think about birthdays gone by, when Evelyn would call from the kitchen, "Get that thing before it wakes the baby." There is a special sorrow in fixing a sound that no longer needs to be fixed. I touched the wooden frame where we recorded height marks in pencil for Brian and Claire, then for my grandson, Noah. Each line sits at the precise edge of pride and time. I did not sleep much. When my body finally went under, it produced a dream where I was standing in the produce aisle, and every apple wore my own funeral photo, one of those too bright studio shots where they retouch your skin until you look like a plaster bust of a man who almost existed. I woke to the first birds and breathed through the tightness in my chest until I remembered it was not pain, just a body that had been to the cliff and was wary of heights. I wore a dark suit that had been tailored back when Evelyn's hand on my arm made me stand up straighter. I tucked the hospital bracelet into the inner pocket where a handkerchief used to go when men carried handkerchiefs as if they were necessary for survival. I slid my wedding ring onto my finger for the first time in months. It made my knuckle ache pleasantly. You can spend your whole life trying to be ready for a certain kind of day and discover the preparation was in the habits you taught yourself without thinking. Show up, keep your voice level, do not blink first. The bank branch had glass walls and a vase of marbles that children like to plunge their hands into until their mothers scold. A woman with a nameplate reading Mara offered me bottled water. Amita and the ex-detective stood near the conference room as if discussing interest rates. The camera blinked an unblinking red. When Brian walked in, he looked like a man who had dressed using a magazine he could not afford. Charcoal suit a shade too slim. Tie too glossy. Hair styled like a promise he could not keep. He kissed the air near Amita's cheek and shook the lawyer's hand. He did not see me at first because he did not expect to. "Mr. Hale," Amita said, and something in her tone made the temperature in the room change a degree. She stepped aside so there was a line between us. My son's face did not crumple. That would have been mercy. Instead, it froze in a new arrangement, as if the sculptor had stepped back and decided the statue was of someone else. He made a noise that might have been a laugh and might have been a gasp. His eyes flicked to the camera humped on its tripod, then to the vase of marbles, then to the cheap flowers that looked like they were trying to smile their way out of plastic sleeves. "Dad," he said finally, and his voice wrapped itself around the word with such carelessness that I almost forgot what it was supposed to mean. "You." I thought, "We." "Brian," I said. It felt strange to speak his name into a space where he had declared me in absence. "Before anyone does anything, I want you to see something." I reached into my jacket and drew out the band. The plastic felt soft from being handled, the letters hard. Resurrected. I did not drop it like a dramatic ant. I did not fling it at him. I held it in both hands for a moment, for the camera, for the record, for the shape of the truth. Then I laid it flat across the packet of papers where the line for his signature waited like a mouth. "This," I said, tapping the gutsy little word, "is what the hospital printed when they realized the first tag was wrong." That night, when the young tech thought I was gone and someone else said not yet, not this one. Resurrected. They made it a joke and then a prayer and then a policy artifact. What it really is, though, is the blade that cuts your lie open from neck to navel. He swallowed, as if the air had unexpected bones in it. Amita's face did not change. The ex-detective took one half-step closer to the door. "Mr. Hale," Barrett said, his voice the low throb of an engine at idle, "we will be asking you to affirm, on camera and on these forms, several statements that materially affect the distribution of insurance funds. Please look at the top page." Brian looked down. The hospital bracelet cast a shadow across the first paragraph and made the document look like it had been underlined by a ghost. His hands fluttered in a tiny, compulsive way that reminded me of when he was 3 and could not get his coat off without tangling his arms. "This is ridiculous," he said, and I thought of the day he insisted he could jump off the shed into snowdrifts like a superhero. He did, and landed wrong, and howled like a siren until Evelyn held him and said, "You are ridiculous and magnificent and you will learn." "What did you tell the notary?" the ex-detective asked in a conversational tone. "Did you tell her you had seen your father's body?" Of course I did," Brian said, as if offended that anyone would question an obvious falsehood. "Where?" the ex-detective asked. "At a funeral home that closed 8 years ago. At a hospital where the attending was at a conference in Milwaukee. In your backyard while you tried to decide if grief looked better with the porch light on or off. What is this?" Brian's voice found anger now, its old friend. "A setup?" "It is a closing," Amita said gently. "We take closings very seriously. You should too." For a second I saw a boy in him. A boy who ate strawberries under the kitchen table with more red on his cheeks than in his mouth. A boy who fell asleep under the coffee table while we watched ball games. A boy who pulled away from me at 13 because everything felt like something squeezing his ribs and he could not figure out where the belt was. "Why?" I asked him, and I meant it without theater. "Why did you do this?" "My business is failing," he said, not looking at me. "We are underwater. The kitchen deposit is due and the bank," he stopped. It was a victimless thing. "You are fine. You are here." "That sentence is not the confession you think it is," Barrett said dryly. "You could have asked me for help," I said, and there it was, the true blade, more painful than the plastic. "I have been here the whole time, even when you acted like I was a ghost." I would have said no to a new kitchen. I might have said yes to a bridge loan for payroll. But you chose to bury me on paper because you thought paper is quiet. "You would have said no," he muttered. "You always say no." "I say no to things that rot," I said. "I say yes to anything that grows." He stared at the bracelet. The room hummed with recycled air and the faint smell of whatever lemons are using to impersonate lemon. I realized I wanted to cry, and the thought made me angry because this was not the time, and I am not the sort of man who has ever used tears as anything but a private mop. "We are going to need you to initial each statement," Barrett said to Brian, his voice smooth as poured cement. "You will be affirming under penalty of perjury that these are true. If you prefer not to sign, we can proceed to the second part instead." "What second part?" Brian asked, though I think he knew. "The part where the officers waiting outside come in and tell you about your rights," the ex-detective said, still pleasant, still watchful. Brian's mouth worked. He laughed again, high and strange, like a sound a kettle makes when forgotten on the stove. He reached for a pen, then pulled his hand back. He looked at me, finally, fully. "I was going to cut you in," he said. "You could have had a little. A stipend. I would have done a memorial bench for Mom. I had plans." The way he said Mom felt like someone trying on a coat that never belonged to them. I thought of Evelyn in her library, the way she set up cardboard castles for her second graders to read in during fairy tale month, the way she clapped when a kid sounded out a long word. She had wanted a reading room in our town since the year before she died. She wanted a mobile library to roll into neighborhoods that do not get to keep school librarians anymore because budgets decide what matters by counting only what can be counted. "Your plans are not my wife," I said. "Your plans are numbers with sugar on them." He signed after that. Not the forms but a statement Amita had readied for this outcome. He acknowledged submitting falsified documents. He acknowledged intent to defraud. He acknowledged lying to a notary, to a clerk, to an insurer, and to a father. He initialed beside each sentence as if he were watching his own hands build a cage out of letters. When the officers came in, he did not fight. He looked at me once more, with an expression that was almost relief beneath its panic, as if the worst thing about stealing is the moment before you are caught, because afterward you finally stop pretending you are still the kind of person who would not. Mallory did not come to the arraignment. Claire sat beside me with her knees pressed together the way Evelyn did when she was trying not to shout at school board meetings. The prosecutor read the charges in a voice that contained no joy. The judge set a bond that made a reporter in the back row look up from his notebook like a prairie dog. Brian's lawyer whispered to him rapidly while he stared at a knot in the wood paneling behind the bench as if it were a target. If this were a story about forgiveness, it would end with me standing up in court and telling the judge that a father's love is more stubborn than greed, that my heart had failed once but would not fail here. This is not that story. This is a story about a very old-fashioned thing called consequence, and the fact that consequence is not cruelty if it is clean. The Special Investigations Unit did what they promised. They filed their materials. They pursued a clawback of every cent that had been temporarily queued for release and kept my policy in force. The prosecutor added a count for identity misrepresentation. There were days I hated the entire enterprise. There were days I thought about getting in my truck and driving until I hit a small town where nobody knows anyone and the diner coffee tastes like aftershave. Instead, I sat down with Amita and the ex-detective and a civil lawyer who reminded me of a Labrador with a law degree, and I asked a question. What if the money we claw back, and any restitution the court orders, did not come back to my pocket? I said. What if it went to a project, the one my wife wanted? A reading room. A bus full of books. Something that says we chose to grow. There are people who will tell you companies cannot be decent. They are wrong as often as they are right. Galameda Mutual Life has shareholders and rules and an armada of lawyers who exist to say no with silk on their tongues. But they also have marketing budgets and community divisions and smart people who understand that a story told right can plant trees. Mr. Hale, Amita said, if we recover funds and the court orders restitution, the path for a donation exists. It would need to be set up as part of a disposition. The prosecutor could support a structured payment to a community foundation you direct. You would not be the payee. The benefiting entity would be. It is unusual. It is not impossible. The district attorney's office surprised me by not being surprised. The assistant district attorney assigned to the case, a woman with a braid like a rope and a smile that only came out when a child walked past her chair, said, "We have done something like that once." A defendant in a theft case agreed his restitution could go to a neighborhood clinic his victim named. If your son pleads and we are discussing numbers, I will keep this on the table. Brian pled. I am not going to write about that afternoon. The sound a grown man makes when he runs out of lies is not for entertainment. My grandson, Noah, has to carry that sound in his legs and the slope of his shoulders even if he never hears it with his ears. I will say this, the court ordered restitution to the insurer in full. It ordered an additional amount for the cost of the state's investigation. It ordered a separate payment, structured across 8 years, to the Evelyn Hale Learning Project, a fund established at the County Community Foundation. Some of that money would come from seizing the boat I did not know my son owned. Some would come from a lien on his new kitchen that would remain a plastic jungle in a magazine, uninstalled forever. Some would come from wage garnishment when he was finally allowed to work again after spending time where people go when rooms lock from the outside. In October, We held a small ceremony on the same courthouse steps where fathers have watched sons take oaths and wives have watched husbands swear to tell the truth and then lie anyway. The reporters came because the story tasted good. The insurer's vice president spoke about ethics and community. The assistant district attorney said a version of the same thing, but you could tell she meant it. I said almost nothing. I held up the hospital band like a farmer holds up a tool that did the job without glamour. We took that money, plus donations from 3 local businesses that had heard about the program and liked the way the story felt so clean it squeaked, and we bought an old school bus from the district fleet. The mechanics rebuilt its guts. Claire and I painted the outside sky blue and wrote, in letters big enough for a child in the back seat of a passing sedan to read, "The Evelyn." Inside, volunteers built low shelves along the walls and a little stage with a rug where someone could read about dragons while a toddler put a slobbery block in your shoe. The district superintendent cried when she cut the ribbon, which is not a thing superintendents usually do in public. The first time we drove the Evelyn into the parking lot at Cedar Park, a little boy yelled, "The book bus," and ran so fast his mother had to pretend to chase him or else she would have cried too. I touched my wedding ring and imagined Evelyn beside me, her hair doing that thing where it never obeyed hats, her hand on my arm, whispering, "Tell them the big blue bus has eyebrows so they feel noticed." I got the marker from my pocket and drew eyebrows above the windshield and made a second grader laugh so hard she snorted. You want to know about Noah? Everyone does. Because you hear insurance fraud and you do not picture a boy with skinned knees on a skateboard. You picture a man in a suit. But fraud always radiates outward. It makes a family into a spill you cannot mop with a single towel. After the plea, Mallory told me Noah would be with her parents for a while, because as it happens, grandparents suddenly gain moral authority when their daughters need a safe place to put shame. I wrote Noah letters anyway, real ones on paper that smelled like the cedar of my desk drawer. I did not talk about his father. I talked about how I once put a turtle in my pocket and forgot until his grandmother rescued me from a smell. I sent him a pocket knife with the blade dulled and told him a man is measured by what he keeps sharper than his knives, his mind, his manners, his word. I told him the book bus would come to his block if he wanted it. He wrote back in a spiky hand that made my heart do the two-step again and said, "I want to read the book about the boy who built a raft." He did not know he had chosen the exact story his grandmother read the day I decided to ask her to marry me. One Saturday near winter, when the air had that iron taste that means the season has decided to be serious, Mallory brought Noah to the bus. He stood with his hands thrust into his jacket like he was declaring he did not need books or grandfathers or anyone. I opened the door. He came in anyway. "You made this with money from Dad," he said. No accusation in it. Just the kind of fact a child says when trying to figure out if the world still works like it did yesterday. "Your father tried to take money from lying," I said. "Other people chose to make that money tell the truth. That is as close to magic as we get without rabbits." He looked at the shelves. He touched one gently like it might startle. "Mom said you are mad." "I am mad," I said. "I am also here." His lower lip did a small, private disaster. He bit it. The look on his face made me think of his father at 3 with his coat turned inside out. "Can I read to you?" he asked, and if there is a prayer I know in my bones, it is the one that starts, "Yes." We read the raft book. When the boy in the story pulled the raft through the water with his shoulders bent in a line that said if I stop, I sink, Noah touched the page and said, "He does not give up." We read another story, and then a third one, because quitting after 2 is a sin in every faith that matters. Before he left, he put a sticky handprint on the window. Claire tried to wipe it off later and I stopped her. I want to keep some proof that does not require a courtroom. I will not say Brian and I have been reconciled. That word implies a balancing of books that are beyond balancing. He writes from where he is, letters in a voice I do not recognize, full of programs and promises. He asks me to bring Noah sometimes. I bring those letters to the assistant district attorney and ask if I am allowed to reply, and she says I can, but I do not know what to say without lying. I have told him once, in a single letter as wide as a desert, your son is reading. If you want a future, you will learn to spell truth. When word got around that the bus was funded by what a prosecutor called clawback sin, people came to the ribbon cutting with faces that forced themselves to be prim about it. The newspaper used the phrase creative justice. The insurer sent a camera crew for a day to make a short video with a string-heavy soundtrack about corporate responsibility. I let them film me because it helps to keep the wheels on the bus and the gas in the tank, and because I am not above leaning on the very machine that almost paid my son to bury me. After the cameras left and the flowers drooped in their jars and Claire said I needed a nap because my eyes had that glassiness that means my heart has been working too hard at carrying weight it cannot fail to carry, I sat on the back step of the bus with the hospital bracelet in my pocket. I drew it out and let it lie across my palm. The letters had begun to fade, minute by minute, as if the word itself were abandoning the plastic for whatever invisible place words go when they are done. When you take a piece of plastic and call it a blade, you do two things: you grant yourself a measure of dignity and you recognize that the sharpest edges we live with are the ones we do not see until they cut. My son chose to forge my ending. He used ink and stamps and a notary who could not be bothered to look me in the face. I chose to use that word on the band, a small stubborn miracle phoned from a printer at 3 a.m, to open his scheme in a room with a camera and cheap flowers and a vase of marbles. The law did the rest. Not because the law is always right, but because this time, we aimed it true. You might be wanting a clean last line, a bow tied tight, a sense that I am no longer angry, that time and generosity washed me soft. They have not. I remain a man with a heart that skipped out on me once and the fear it might again if I carry too much smoke. I remain a father who looks at his son and sees a poem that refuses to rhyme. But I am also a grandfather who can tell you the exact sound a child makes when he realizes the book you are reading has a dragon but the dragon is lonely, and you will carry him across the river anyway. On the day before Thanksgiving, we drove the Evelyn to a trailer park on the south edge of town where the streetlights always seem to apologize. The kids lined up with their jackets open because zippers are for later. A little girl with cocoa on her lip asked me if the bus is a church. I told her no, but the stories inside might save her anyway. She nodded like I had said something older than either of us. I stepped to the door to call the next name on the sign-up sheet. It was Noah's handwriting. It was my last name. He came up the steps, cheeks red with wind. He looked around like a sailor who has learned to read the sky. He set his hand on a stack of paperbacks with a delicacy that only comes from children who have had to handle adults too roughly. I handed him the raft book again because sometimes we need to repeat lessons until the muscle remembers. The bus hummed. The heater clicked. Outside, a mother laughed at something a toddler did not understand and would never forget. Inside, a boy and his grandfather read words that told the truth about rivers, and rafts, and the kinds of people who do not ask if the current is coming. They step in, together, and pull. When we finished, he put his head against my shoulder. It lasted a breath. Maybe two. Then he pulled away and made a show of choosing a book to check out, because boys are proud and that is a good thing if you teach it to bow when required. At the door, he looked back at me. "Grandpa?" he asked. "Yes, Son. Do you think people come back? I assumed he meant his father. I considered answering with doctrine or law or some hard sentence about consequences. Instead I touched the pocket where the hospital band lay curled like a sleeping snake. Sometimes they do, I said. Sometimes it takes longer than you want and hurts more than it should. Sometimes they come back, and sometimes you learn how to go on when they do not. But you always keep reading. Because the worst fraud in this world is the lie that says that is not possible. He nodded with the infinite seriousness of a child who has made his first decision for himself. He stepped into the cold and pulled the door after him. The bus shuddered a little and then stilled. I sat in the driver's seat and stared through the eyebrowed windshield at a sky the color of clean steel. My chest hurt the way it does when something large is moving under it, a train or forgiveness. I took the hospital bracelet out again and set it on the dash. I do not carry it much anymore because it is not the blade I need these days. The blade I carry now is quieter, a razor made of patience and pages and the hissing sound the bus makes when its brakes let go and its wheels begin to turn.
Greetings, and thanks for spending your time with us today. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. I want to wish you a peaceful day or a restful evening, wherever you may be. Take care, and we'll see you next time.